You paid for the TV. The TV is paying someone else. Right now, over 100 million American households have installed what the industry quietly calls a listening room, a screen that takes a screenshot of whatever you're watching every 500 milliseconds around the clock and sells that data to advertisers while you sleep. Vizio's own CFO admitted in 2021 that the company earns more money from the data harvested inside your home than from the television you handed them cash to own. Ashwin Navan saw this coming in 2008 when he co-founded the company that would eventually embed surveillance software into tens of millions of TVs by offering manufacturers a deal almost impossible to refuse. Free technology in exchange for everything a viewer would ever watch, in every room the screen would ever sit. The manufacturer got a selling point. Navan got a data network. Nobody had to say what it was actually for, and for a long time, nobody did. It's a bit like hiring a cleaner who photographs your mail while you're out. You paid for the service. The service is real, but there was always a second transaction you weren't told about. So how did a discount on a television become the most profitable data extraction operation ever placed inside a private home? And how is that same model now using artificial intelligence to insert advertisements directly into films you already own, playing on hardware you already paid for, in a room the industry has quietly decided belongs to them? This is unpriced risk. The whole thing made sense, right up until it didn't. 4 years of data collection flowed through 11 million living rooms before Washington even convened a meeting about it. Vizio, the American TV manufacturer, had started embedding ACR data collection across its smart TV lineup in November 2013. ACR, automated content recognition, software that takes a snapshot of whatever's on screen, matches it against a database of known content, and logs what you're watching with second-by-second precision. Vizio was doing this without telling the people who owned those televisions what was actually being collected or why. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, the U.S. agency responsible for protecting consumers from deceptive business practices, had been watching. In February 2017, they announced they'd caught Vizio doing exactly what the complaint described. The penalty was $2.2 million. Sit with that number for a second. A single 30-second slot during the Super Bowl costs more. Not a campaign, one slot. The fine, meant to signal the government's seriousness about living room surveillance, was smaller than the entry fee for one night of prime advertising real estate. FTC Commissioner Travis LeBlanc said it plainly. The settlement was inadequate given the scale of the violation. He said it on the record, and the files are right there. And then the settlement was signed anyway, which is worth pausing on. What followed wasn't dramatic. No industry-wide pullback, no emergency redesign of opt-in screens. The $2.2 million figure circulated through the advertising data business quietly, a revealed price, the cost of getting caught. If the revenue generated by 11 million surveilled households over several years dwarfed that number, and it did, then the math wasn't complicated. It wasn't a stop sign. It was a toll booth. You pay, you pass through, and you keep going exactly as before. Ashwin Navan had been thinking about this math since 2008. TV manufacturers were caught in a race to the bottom on price, squeezed between overseas competitors and big box retail margins that left almost nothing on the table. His offer was straightforward. Let us put our software on your TV for free. You get a feature to advertise on the box, content discovery, smart recommendations, something that sounds good in a Best Buy aisle. We get the data your customers generate every time they sit down in their living rooms. The manufacturer got a selling point. Navan got a surveillance network, and nobody had to call it that. Sony took the deal. Sharp took it. Philips too. Once 3 major brands had embedded Samba TV's software, the holdouts faced a different kind of pressure. Their competitors were offering smarter-seeming TVs at the same price, and the cost of matching that feature was zero. It spread the way most things spread when the math is obvious and the downside is invisible to everyone except the person sitting on the couch. Then, in January 2019, Brian X. Chen, a technology reporter at the New York Times, published what he'd found inside Samba TV's setup flow. The opt-in screen that appeared during first-time configuration was real consent, technically, but the language describing what you were agreeing to was vague in the places that mattered most, and the framing around it was engineered to make agreement feel like the natural, obvious choice. The consent wasn't fake. It was just built by people who understood that the difference between a 60% opt-in rate and a 90% opt-in rate is worth tens of millions of dollars, and designed accordingly. That same year, Roku reported that its advertising and data revenue had quietly overtaken what the company made selling its actual hardware. The device was never really the product. It was the door. Which brings us back to the question the industry had been quietly asking long before Vizio ever appeared on the FTC's radar. Not whether regulators would eventually act, but how much acting would cost. The fine, it turned out, was just another line in the business model. If this is the first time you're seeing that the fine was just another line in the business model, hit like. It helps more people find it. By 2020, the infrastructure Naven had spent a decade building was fully load-bearing. The pandemic locked 100 million households in front of their televisions, and the advertisers followed them there. What changed wasn't the technology. It was the scale at which anyone was suddenly willing to use it. Here's what the setup screen never described. Every half second, a smart TV running ACR software captures a screenshot of whatever is on screen. Not a summary, not a log, a fingerprint, matched in near real time against a database of millions of content samples. The system knows not just that you're watching a show, but which scene, which minute, which ad break you skipped. That viewing fingerprint then moves down a pipeline that has nothing to do with your television manufacturer. Third-party data brokers receive it, cross-reference it against your purchase history, your location data, your credit profile, and return a behavioral portrait precise enough to tell an advertiser whether you're in the market for a car, whether you've recently visited a competitor's store, whether the medication they're considering is likely to land. The Electronic Frontier Foundation documented this in April 2021, tracing ACR data flows from multiple smart TV brands to brokers operating entirely outside what any setup screen had ever disclosed. Whether every manufacturer in that chain was aware of the full downstream path the data traveled is frankly something the public record doesn't fully resolve. The living room, reconstructed as a spreadsheet, that was already the twist, but it wasn't the last one. A company called Myriad and later Rembrandt developed something that closed the remaining gap. Their technology doesn't place an ad before or after the content. It inserts the ad inside the content retroactively, in real time, into films and shows that had already been made. A bottle on a kitchen counter that wasn't there when the scene was shot. A logo on a wall the director never approved. ACR tells the advertiser what you're watching. AI placement delivers the ad inside that exact scene. The viewer has no way to know the image has been altered because the alteration happens between the file and the screen, invisibly, in the half second nobody's watching. Like a painting restored by someone who decided, quietly, to change what it was a painting of. All of that, the fingerprints, the brokers, the AI-altered frames, was the architecture running at full speed before anyone in the industry had to say out loud what it was actually built for. What connected it to what came next wasn't a scandal. It was an earnings call. In 2021, Vizio disclosed something its marketing had never once suggested. Its Platform Plus division, the data and advertising side of the business, generated more revenue than the sale of televisions, not comparable revenue. More. The hardware that consumers had bought, carried home, and mounted on their walls had by that point become the least profitable thing Vizio made. The product was never the TV. The inventory was the room it sat in. The strange part, and it took a while to see it clearly in the filings, is that this wasn't buried. It was in a document submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, readable by anyone who thought to look. That's the moment the implicit contract became impossible to misread. Consumers weren't customers. They were the raw material. And once you see that, Naven's model doesn't look like a startup story anymore. It looks like the instruction manual for an entire industry. The cheap TV wasn't a gift. It was the cost of acquiring a surveillance node in a private home. Most people didn't look. The TV was still on the wall. The price had seemed reasonable at the time. The U.S. connected TV advertising market reached roughly $25 billion annually by 2022 and 2023, according to industry estimates. That's not a niche business quietly humming in the background. That's a number that explains why nobody stopped. 4 years passed between that earnings call and the next thing that actually changed the legal landscape. What held the gap together wasn't regulation. It was the quiet expansion of the same logic into territory nobody had formally contested yet. In December 2025, the Texas Attorney General filed suit against Samsung, Sony, LG, Hisense, and TCL simultaneously. 5 manufacturers, 1 coordinated action, with temporary restraining orders already issued. A restraining order is a court's instruction to stop a specific activity while the case is being heard, immediate, binding, and considerably harder to ignore than a settlement negotiation. No federal agency led this. A state-level office, working largely without precedent, became the first institution with formal legal standing to say that what these televisions were doing required a court's permission to continue. The restraining orders are still active as of this recording, though what the courts ultimately do with them is a question the record can't yet answer. Meanwhile, a separate problem has arrived that the Texas lawsuit doesn't touch. Systems like XAI Halftime now operate at commercial scale, inserting products into films and television in real time. Not into a broadcast stream, not into a platform's library, but into files sitting on a viewer's own hard drive. A film you own, stored locally, can now be altered during playback by an advertiser with no legal relationship to the film's creators, no contract with the viewer, and no record of the change. The director doesn't know. The viewer doesn't know. The file looks identical afterward, like a book that rewrites a sentence while you're reading it, then denies the original ever said anything different. Navin's original insight, that the room was more valuable than the device, turned out to be a floor, not a ceiling. The living room is now an advertising surface that charges no admission, discloses no terms, and can't be fully switched off by unplugging the television. The next time a product appears in a scene you could have sworn wasn't there before, you won't be wrong. Whether that bothers you enough to do anything about it is, at this point, the only part of the equation that hasn't already been decided for you. The file on your hard drive still says it's the original. The price was set before the product ever shipped. Thanks for watching Unpriced Risk. Hit subscribe and we'll see you in the next one.